Hello, welcome to today's webinar on reproductive justice and how this issue impacts the survivors that you work with. My name is Tracy Underwood, and I work at the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. We are a nonprofit member organization of over 73 member programs across Washington State who are in all of your communities and primarily serve survivors of domestic violence. I coordinate our economic justice project here at the Coalition, and a big part of my job is working with CSD and DCS on policies and implementation of those policies that help survivors access services at the CSO. And I'm here with my colleague, Lee Hofheimer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lee Hofheimer, and I work as well at the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence with Tracy, and I coordinate our reproductive justice work and work on building relationships with other allied organizations and supporting our advocates on behalf of this work throughout our state.
So you might be wondering why domestic violence advocates are talking to you about reproductive justice issues, but I think by the end of this webinar, you'll definitely understand how linked and how important it is to think about them together, that they actually are. I want to, I go back, Lee, sorry, I want to take a moment. I want you to look at this art. I really love this project called the Repeal Hide Project. So you can find them on Instagram and on the web. They have a lot of really great art, but this is one of the pieces that they have that says you deserve to parent your child without fear, and that freedom from violence is reproductive justice. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what do we want for everybody? What does reproductive justice mean? It means so much more than just access to birth control, right? It means that people can love whoever they want, that, consensual sex with whoever they want, like who they choose to love, who their heart wants. That's really important. That families get to decide how many children they want, when they want those children, how all of that happens. That once children are in families and in communities, that they have access to things like good school and good health care and safety in their communities. And that these choices are, that there's long-term solutions to beyond sort of crisis or need, that there's access and long-term solutions for safety and stability and choice in communities and hope for the future. And then in order to have all of those things, we have to think about and address what gets in the way of people living life in this whole and happy way. Unplanned pregnancy, unprotected sex, birth control, these things are not why people come to you, but they do get in the way. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. They do get in the way of the things that y'all are trying to do, trying to help people with in your roles at the CSO. They are definitely things that folks may not want to talk to you about or even know that they could, because you might have resources. But that these sorts of issues impact the people that you work with every day, and are barriers to doing the things that you're set up to help them with, like job search, job training, getting stable and secure. So there are lots of ways that people who cause harm in their relationships, people who abuse, can use reproduction and sex as tactics to continue that abuse and further that abuse. So there are So can you go back, Lee? Sorry. So, domestic violence and sexual violence are connected to things like birth control sabotage, pregnancy pressure, and unintended pregnancies, to name a few things about how these things are connected. The, domestic violence increases people's risk for things like STDs or STIs, unintended pregnancies, rapid repeat pregnancy, which we'll dig into a little bit more in a minute, what we mean by that, and HIV. So domestic violence, increases the risk for all of these things because of those tactics that abusers use, that people who cause harm use in their relationships by the things that I mentioned before, sabotaging birth control, threatening behavior and controlling, somebody's ability to get pregnant when they want to, or even have sex when they want to. There's one study, or maybe a few studies, Lee, I don't know, maybe you know a little bit more about the science behind this, but there's studies that show that adolescent mothers in particular, who experienced physical abuse within 3 months after delivery, were nearly twice as likely to have a repeat pregnancy within 24 months. And this is something I think that is particularly important to think about in your line of work, and important to point out, because you see this a lot, probably not only in adolescents, but in all of the families that you work with. Like, you might see where someone is struggling and trying to get safe and stable and trying to figure things out, and then they're pregnant again, right? And they maybe just had a baby a year ago, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Or they might have a baby, they might get pregnant again, and you're like, well, I knew you were experiencing domestic violence, but why? Like, so you must not be experiencing that anymore because you're safe enough to have sex with this person, you're back with this person. And I think that is just a myth that we want to address and change the way that we think about that, because there was this myth of back in the 80s, and I think it still lingers today, even if we don't necessarily think about the welfare queen in this way, right? But there was this myth then that like people were just getting pregnant over and over to like have as many babies to get more, to get a bigger TANF check, or to get a bigger, at that time it was AFDC, right? To get more money, which we know, I think you and I all know that that's a myth, that is not why people are coming to us, coming to you. That's not a tactic that's happening. But I do think that it's still kind of pervasive in society today. And it's also something that, but even if that's not the way that we all think right now, there still is probably, it does probably cause pause sometimes when you're like, oh my gosh, this person already has enough on their plate, and now they're pregnant again. And I think it's important for us to remember that folks who get pregnant like right after having a baby, that's actually a red flag or a warning sign for us, rather than a moment to judge that person. That's actually information to say, whoa, wait a minute, I have some data on this, there's some information that says that this might be a red flag, that this person is experiencing violence. It's in fact the opposite of what you might think, that oh well, this person is back with their partner, so they must not be experiencing domestic violence anymore. It's actually, it actually may be the opposite, where this person is experiencing control and power and control in their life, and they don't actually have the ability to say, no, I don't want to have sex with you, or no, I don't want to get pregnant again, I just had a baby, like we're still dealing with this infant, right? So it's actually a really great opportunity to ask more questions and offer domestic violence resources.
So thanks, Tracy. She really set us up to talk a little, to now dig a little bit deeper into what do we mean when we're talking about reproductive and sexual coercion. And I often like to say it's an age-old problem, someone messing with your birth control, not respecting your decisions around reproductive health and sexuality. But what I think is so helpful is the framework is new. So Futures Without Violence did this study with Dr. Elizabeth Miller in 2010, where they talked to women who were using Planned Parenthood clinics in California and asked them, of the women who raised their hand to say they were experiencing coercion and abuse, asked them about what was going on in their relationships around sexuality, family planning, birth control access, and found, not surprising, I'm sure you would not be surprised to see this, that people who were experiencing unplanned pregnancies were at an increased risk for violence. And violence, also people experiencing violence were at an increased risk for unplanned pregnancies. And the women and the teens that they talked to in these studies, and I think this is true for most folks, wouldn't experience them themselves as identify them as a victim of anything, especially if the only form of like physical or sexual abuse is around reproductive health, sexual coercion, and birth control. So this framework of looking at these issues side by side helps us understand the link and how the connections can be made. And you can see in this image that the linkage can go both ways. And that we think about reproductive and sexual coercion on a continuum of tactics of coercion and abuse that women and girls and anyone who could be pregnant can experience. So that study really helped us to be able to talk to folks from the advocacy perspective in systems, people that work around supporting families in various systems, to say, as Tracy talked about earlier, let's dig into this context a little bit more. And it's also, I think, really helpful when we think about judgment that happens with survivors who may be pregnant again, or especially if they're younger people. We often hear people say, their brains aren't finished growing. They're just not making good decisions. They don't have enough education. They don't have enough information, as opposed to looking at what's the context in which someone's getting pregnant. What's going on? What are the pressures people are feeling around that pregnancy or the time of pregnancy, even if it's a wanted pregnancy? So Futures did this study, was really helpful for us, and they coined the term reproductive and sexual coercion. And based on this study and some others that were done, we came up with a working definition that reproductive and sexual coercion involves behaviors that a partner can use to maintain power and control in a relationship that are related to reproductive health. So these are some categories to help explain what that means, that captures a lot of the behaviors that we're talking about. And again, I just want to reemphasize that I don't think anyone's going to come to you and say, I'm experiencing reproductive and sexual coercion. They may not see themselves as experiencing any kind of victimization. As a matter of fact, I've certainly worked with survivors who've said to me, the sex is still good between us, but I still can't negotiate like birth control use. So if we look at kind of these categories, there are tactics or behaviors where the person causing harm is pushing for pregnancy against that person's wishes, controlling the outcomes of the pregnancy, whether it's to have a pregnancy, to terminate a pregnancy, actually physically coercing a partner to have unprotected sex, and interfering or sabotaging birth control methods. And, so somehow practically looks like she may not have a say in family planning and when next to be pregnant, even if she does want to be pregnant. So I think a way that reproductive and sexual coercion kind of gets sort of goes underground and more invisible in terms of tactics that people experience is just sort of how we think about reproductive and sexual coercion sort of across our relationships and just sort of pop culture. What does it mean to be pressured to have pregnant? It's very confusing around maybe the community I live in and the cultures I identify with and the family pressures I'm a part of, having kids is a good thing and why aren't I having as many as possible? And so there's a lot of confusing messages around it. And I think one of the things that that just happened not too long ago. For those of you, some of you may not follow Saturday Night Live, but for those of you who do or don't, Pete Davidson, who's a comic on Saturday Night Live, part of the cast, was in a relationship with Ariana Grande, a really famous pop singer, for a minute there. And, I was watching it and I saw this little clip. Last night I switched her birth control with Tic Tacs, and we thought we'd just take a moment and actually play it for you and see the reaction of the audience and talk about it for a second. Here we go.
He does not. Yeah, last night I switched her birth control with Tic Tacs. No, I believe in us and all. But, I just want to, make sure that she can't go anywhere.
Well, she put a song on her new album, and it was...
Excellent. So I really feel like that's a little bit of a clip that gives us an insight into humor, and maybe specifically male humor, about how we think about entrapping people in relationships, and how, that we all kind of I don't know if we all laughed at that little clip right there, but I think it sounded familiar and resonated with people. And I think if you think about this kind of conversation within the context of a relationship where your decisions are undermined, your the things that you value are not placed at the forefront, you can see where planning around pregnancy and when to get pregnant and birth control negotiation can be tough. And we know even in relationships where coercion and abuse isn't happening, those can be hard conversations to have. When are we getting pregnant? Do we want to have kids? What kind of birth control are you using? So then even in that, so if you add coercion and abuse, you can see the conversations are even more challenging. So what are some other ways a partner can interfere with someone's birth control? So you can probably think of some of the really obvious ways, like, destroying pills, poking holes in condoms, if someone's using a cervical cap or any other kind of barrier method, interfering with that, not driving someone. If the person causing harm is the only one that has access to the car, there's one car in the family, not providing transportation to buy birth control to the pharmacy, not providing the money, accusing her of not wanting to have a child, threatening to leave the relationship, pressuring for more kids, controlling the outcomes, as we were talking about earlier, either way, causing a miscarriage or forcing someone to have an abortion who didn't want to have an abortion, intentionally exposing a partner to STIs or HIV. And, I think about the story I heard not too long ago of a survivor telling me that her partner pulled her IUD out by the strings. So, there are lots of ways that people can interfere and sabotage birth control use. It's not just about saying no, or even oops, forgot to pull out, even though we discussed this. So it can be something from things that seem kind of minor or seem like something you could handle to something that's more egregious and less in the control of the person. I also thought it might be interesting to include, let's see, I'm trying to forward. There we go. To include a study that came out not too long ago. This was a study with survivors who said their partner had tried to get them pregnant against their will or stop them from using birth control. And among these survivors, pretty high number, 84% became pregnant as a result. So unplanned pregnancies, and I want to be clear, this is not necessarily an unwanted pregnancy, but from y'all's experience that how an unplanned pregnancy can negatively impact a survivor's ability to establish economic security, increase their educational skills or work opportunities. And, there's also costs associated with raising a child or having that opportunity to have other choices within the relationship.
So yes, so thank you, Lee, for all of that information. It's a lot of information. And you don't have to necessarily even know what is all the details of the folks that you work with. You don't need to know the details of their life to be able to offer information. We know that this is stuff that happens enough I mean, we just watched that clip of Pete Davidson, and like it's so pervasive, and that kind of attitude is so common that it was on Saturday Night Live, and people are just laughing at that. And I think the important thing to remember here is that um, it's so common, unfortunately, right? And people are, and especially the folks that you work with, we know that for those on TANF, there have been several national studies that say that 50 to 70% of the TANF caseload has experienced domestic violence at some point in their life. That's a lot. It's a lot. Um, and you're not necessarily going to know that. That doesn't mean that they're experiencing it right now, but they still might be experiencing the after effects, or they might have in the past, and they might get into another relationship that's coercive. And you don't need to know all the info for you to be able to offer resources and information about it that could be helpful. So the way what's great about being able to offer information about DV advocacy essentially is what we're talking about, like offering information around that there are folks, some of them in your offices, but everybody has a DV advocacy program in their community, and there's resources at the end of this. We'll talk about that later. But the beauty of that is that you don't have to be the expert at it, right? You can say, look, we have somebody in the office or in our community who specifically works with folks who are dealing with struggles in their relationship. It's great to say that, because a lot of people don't identify as a victim of domestic violence, right? People hear that label and they're like, oh, that's not me, right? I'm not getting beaten. Even though you and I know that that's not necessarily what domestic violence looks like. That's still something that a lot of survivors don't necessarily identify with. A lot of people experiencing harm in their relationships don't identify with that label. So I like to use the term, relationship struggles, or struggling in your relationship. And you can just offer information to say, like, look, we know a lot of people have ups and downs in their relationships, and there's folks in our community that can help, and we give this information to everybody. And if these are the types of things you're experiencing, you can get help. So being able to do that without necessarily waiting for a disclosure or confirmation that this person's experiencing reproductive coercion. That way there's no like stigmatizing labels. Nobody's saying like, oh, I've identified you as this, right? So then you get this information. And being able to talk about healthy relationships too, being able to identify what a healthy relationship looks like and what folks should be able to expect, what we all deserve. And we've got more information and resources about that.
And I just wanted to add to that. I think that it's kind of liberating to have this approach of offering information kind of in a universal educational message way, because then you don't have to, I remember when we first started doing work around reproductive and sexual coercion, and we would have on our forms, even in our advocacy programs, ask people if they've experienced unprotected sex in the last period of time, or ask people if they're afraid of, if they worry about being pregnant. Like, these are really personal questions when you're first meeting people. And why would people answer those questions to folks who they don't have a relationship with, don't have trust with, don't necessarily know where that information is going, and they need help from us? So like, what are they supposed to do answering those questions? So we kind of just took a moment, took a pause, and said, what if we just offer information, the don't ask, just tell approach? And we just tell everyone there are resources out there for people who are struggling in their relationships or having ups and downs. And you don't have to know if anyone's experiencing some of the examples of things that we talked about. So we're going to move into talking about advocacy resources, but we're going to also provide you with some other information that just might be helpful for you to have in your back pocket as you go along in these conversations.
Thank you, Lee. Excellent. So I want to talk a little bit about what domestic violence and sexual assault programs in your community are doing about this right now, because I think that's helpful information for you to have in your back pocket, so that if somebody isn't understanding why you might maybe giving a resource, or or is hesitant to contact a program because they don't know if they can help, you'll have that information at the ready.
So we think it's like really helpful, especially in these time of COVID, to really lean into building your relationships with your local programs. If you haven't called before in the past and said, hey, can I drop in by Zoom to a part of your staff meeting, or could we have a Zoom get together and get to know more about what you offer, just so that you can actually say with confidence, I've talked to Lee at X program. She's a nice person. She told me this and this and that is available to you. They're free, they're confidential services. So I know you all have a general feeling and have all the phone numbers, and maybe some of you already have those individual relationships. But if you don't, this time is more important now than ever, because staying connected is more important than ever. And that may be the only way that survivors can feel supported. It's to know that they can have a private phone call, to know you have a little bit more information than you did before, because people are more isolated now and experiencing, it's harder for them to have options, obviously, if they're stuck at home with the person causing harm in their life. So what we're going to move into next, besides giving you more information about advocacy programs, we're going to talk about some other birth control methods that we think, again, we're not asking you to initiate these conversations with people coming to you, but we just want you to have the information, because you just may be able to listen to the conversation differently and be able to offer some information, or just be able to say, there's some forms of birth control that are less likely to be detected by someone else. I'm going to turn this back over to Tracy.
Thanks. So yes, like Lee said, again, you're not necessarily digging into conversations about this with people, but this is information that's handy to have in your back pocket, because it might help you listen to what somebody's saying a little bit differently, about their relationship. You do go through lots of questions with folks, and you do, the comprehensive evaluation has you asking a lot of information about people's lives, so that we can identify barriers and things like that. And so sometimes something like this might come up, so it's important to listen carefully. So something that our advocates in our programs out there are talking to survivors about too are birth, they are talking about reproductive justice and reproductive coercion issues, and they are able to offer information about birth control methods that are less likely to be detected by a sexual partner, and so that can be really helpful for folks. And so just so you know, that if you send them to an advocate, advocates can talk about these things with folks as well. If their partner is monitoring menstrual cycles, there are certain IUDs, that copper T IUD can be the safest method, because it doesn't mess with your periods. But then the medical professional who puts that in can cut the strings, so it can't be pulled out or felt by a partner. So it's really what we like to call stealth birth control, right? Mm-hmm. That it's an effective birth control method that can't be detected by their partner. And then they can just make excuses, as to they can work out their safety plan around why they're not getting pregnant, if that's something that they're experiencing pregnancy pressure or whatnot from a partner. But being able to actually prevent that pregnancy and not have an unwanted pregnancy can impact all of those things that Lee talked about earlier, that reduces the cost, because kids are expensive, and won't get in the way of their job or education, aspirations. And I think, Lee, are you talking about this stuff?
Sure, I can talk about this. So again, we're not suggesting that you provide this information, but we want you to know that advocates can be talking with folks about it. So even if you're having a conversation if you actually are having a conversation with somebody and they say, you know, I'm just not sure I'm ready to have more kids right away, or I'm just not sure about my choices. Even if you have a relationship with a family planning organization in your community, or you have a relationship with, again, advocacy programs, you can say, you know, these are folks you can talk to about what your options are, and maybe some forms of birth control that are easier to remember to take or less likely to be felt by a partner without having to know if that's something somebody needs or not. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the emergency contraception pill, because there's been changes in the law over the past 10 years, and there's a lot of confusion with it regarding confusing it with the abortion pill and what it can do. So we're just trying to give some like baseline information out to folks about it, because it's a form of contraception that's available now. It's the one pill, or the one step, which has many names. You've probably seen My Way, Plan B, the next morning. I've seen all kinds of names for it now, but we're talking about one pill, and it's available over the counter, online, and without a prescription in every state. It doesn't matter anymore what your age is, what your gender is, whether you're a citizen or not, whether you have an ID or not. It used to be you had to have a prescription. For those of us who are old enough to remember, you had to have a prescription if you were 17 or younger. That's changed. In 2014, it became available. And the thing that we like to make really clear with folks is that emergency contraception can only end a pregnancy. It works in the body before fertilization begins. And the other thing that's helpful to know is that in our state, in Washington State, minors, teens, don't need consent or have to notify a parent or guardian to take emergency contraception, to purchase it, to get it. Unlike, you know, this is the only time I will mention the abortion pill, that can end a pregnancy, but it only ends pregnancies within the first 9 weeks. It's a medical abortion, and you would need a prescription. So emergency contraception is definitely not an abortion pill. And for people who like get a little confused about it, it's really, we just want you to feel confident and clear to say that it can only prevent pregnancy. And we're going to talk now a little bit more about how it works in our body. So the chief way it works, one of the things that's really important to know, is that fertilization is not immediate, no matter what pop culture tells us. You know, things we see in the movies, things we see and read in books. We've had people say, I knew this time, you know, I had intercourse, I was pregnant. As a public health nurse friend of mine would say, yes, that might have been the time she actually got pregnant, but what she probably felt was a rush of hormones. Fertilization is not immediate, so it allows emergency contraception to work by either delaying ovulation, depending where you are in your cycle, or thickening the cervical mucus that prevents an egg from implanting in the uterus. The one hormone emergency contraception is progesterone only. There's other kinds of emergency contraception. You've probably heard the name Ella. That's 2 pills or 2 steps, and you do need a prescription for that. The thing that I like to remind people again is emergency contraception cannot undo a fertilized egg and sperm. And the cheapest way to get it now is on Amazon. It's ranging between $8 and $12 a pill. You know, you can't get emergency contraception anywhere for free, even in a hospital. You go into a hospital and you experience and you need emergency contraception for whatever reason you need it for. You have to sign something. You have to answer a lot of questions. You can't just get it. It's not free anywhere. And if you go into stores, you know, anything from Walmart to Bartell's, I've seen the prices ranging from $39.99 to $75 per pill. So we've been saying to our advocacy programs, what if you just had some available at your program in your desk drawer, given that it's only, given how inexpensive it is. And so I would say that like over half our programs right now probably still have it anecdotally. So that's another reason why you can refer people, is that there may be emergency contraception for free at our advocacy programs as well. So let's just talk a little bit about the side effects. So people say to me, like, how do I know EC worked? So people usually have some bleeding, but not everyone will. Bleeding can start as soon as 8 to 12 hours after taking it, or up to 2 days later, or someone may not bleed at all. And it also depends where someone is in their cycle. Bleeding is a side effect, but it's not a guarantee that someone's not pregnant. The other way, really the only way you know you're not pregnant for sure is to take a pregnancy test 7 to 14 days after unprotected sex. I always like to remind people too that if someone is taking testosterone or hormones, they still have their ovaries. They can still ovulate even though there's no period. So they would never bleed. So even, and it's safe still to take emergency contraception even if you're taking testosterone. So what I tell folks who are taking testosterone, still get that pregnancy test 2 weeks after unprotected sex. Other things people worry about. So I'm taking EC, I've taken emergency contraception. Could it harm a developing pregnancy? No, actually it's the same hormone progesterone you have when you're often pregnant. And people walk around pregnant all the time and don't even know it. They ask, could it interfere with future pregnancies or infertility? Absolutely not. There are fewer side effects than often with general birth control pills. You can be nauseous. Some people throw up within 2 hours. If you throw it up within 2 hours, you would have to take emergency contraception again. Could you take emergency contraception every day over and over again? Yes, it would be pretty expensive, even at the cheaper price. But that would be where it'd be helpful to have a discussion around longer acting birth control, which again, advocacy programs can do. So we just want to kind of give you some of that basic information so that you can feel clear for yourself. All right, so Tracy, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, all of that sounds great. You are the expert on that information, so I'm glad that you share it.
All right, so then Tracy and I wanted to just hit a highlight on some changes in healthcare coverage in Washington state alone. And we narrowed down to focus on domestic violence survivors and young people who could also be a domestic violence survivor as well. So just to remind everybody, and there's a handout on our website as well. This is a hyperlink here, but you can go to the WSCDF website to find this information. In our state, minors who do not need consent and don't need to notify parents or guardians at any age when they want to seek birth control services, abortion services, or prenatal care services. You have to be 14 or older to get sexually transmitted disease testing and treatment, and that includes HIV testing and treatment. So we just want to be like, I just think again, it's a kind of a relief, and it's just good to know that if you're a minor in Washington state, you don't need anyone's permission to get information, access to any of these services. The other thing that's helpful to know if you're a survivor of domestic violence about any age, this is a law that applies across the whole country federally. At any time, a survivor of domestic violence can enroll in health care. And it's all you need is a self-report. You need to just say that you've experienced domestic violence. You don't need any proof. You don't need a court order. You don't need a police report. And again, we have a handout on our website that's just 2 pages long about with some general questions. So even if your partner has health insurance, you can file separately from your partner. If you're an undocumented person, there's some restrictions, but there's still some options again for you applying. So all this, if you're fleeing domestic violence, so all these things apply. And I just think it's really important to know that survivors of domestic violence can enroll for healthcare at any time. And your navigator or tribal sisters in Washington state are trained on these things. Okay, so there's been some changes in Washington state. Some of you might have been familiar with the Take Charge program. That name may sound familiar when it comes to contraception. So there's 2 new programs in Washington state that the legislature put into effect in January. They're called family planning only programs. They're very familiar. So what is important to know about both of these programs? So family planning only is focused on contraception, and family planning only is focused on pregnancy. It's a lot of what people often talk about when they talk about Apple Health pregnancy coverage. Is both programs now are designed to cover gaps and offer confidentiality family planning services. And they're both now eligible for undocumented folks. And you can just see briefly in the column where it says family planning only. Men are now eligible, how long it is for a year, self-report only, no documentation needed. What's covered is contraception, screening for cervical cancer, family planning, tubal ligation, sterilization, vasectomy, IUD placement and removal. And then you see what's not covered. So again, on the family planning only pregnancy, two big changes now. The program is longer. So now it goes for 10 months after. So basically the coverage goes 1 year postpartum. That time has been extended. And so again, the main thing we want to say is that undocumented people are now eligible for both family planning only programs in Washington state. Yay. Okay, and the next thing, some of you may be familiar with this, but we just like to remind folks that health insurance companies in Washington state are required to cover a 12-month refill of birth control pills rather than 12 separate 30-day refills, and these prescriptions are provided to consumers at no cost. That means a person could receive a 12-month supply of birth control pills in one visit to a pharmacy without paying out of pocket. However, you can request a smaller amount. A doctor can prescribe a smaller amount. There's the hyperlink spelled out so you can look for it yourself. So that gives options to survivors, like maybe that one visit to the clinic or that one visit to the pharmacy, to know that if they wanted to get all their birth control pills in one time, or 6 months worth, or whatever amount they can now. So I feel like it gives options to survivors in their planning around safety and dealing with reproductive and sexual coercion. All right.
Great.
So we're going to go back to Tracy. Yep.
That was a ton of great information. And again, to reiterate, you don't have to be an expert on all of these things. We're giving you this information so that you'll have it in your back pocket. It'll resonate in your head. Maybe something will come up when you're talking with someone. But it's just important to be proactive, I think, with all of this. You are a source of information. You're a place where so many survivors come every day. You see so many more survivors at the CSO than our programs, our DV programs, will ever see, because people don't call our programs until things have gotten really bad. They don't even know that a DV advocacy program exists until their situation has gotten dire and they've had to reach out and, figure out extra help, right? But they might be coming to you in all, like in sort of all stages of their relationships, right? You see survivors, whether or not they're just in a new relationship that might be controlling, or in the middle of it, or, you also see survivors who are, also connected to our programs in sort of like extra crisis mode. But the point is, you see a lot more survivors than our programs will ever see, which is such great news for our partnership, because that means that you get to give folks information that they might not normally receive if, until their situation gets really, really bad. So people don't need to tell you their whole story, right? For you to be able to give them the information and offer information. And what's important, like a great way to be able to do this and to be up on all of the, to understand how your local DV program or your local on-site advocate can help, is to build those relationships with your local advocacy programs, not just when there's a crisis, not just when you've got somebody in front of you who's told you a story that is alarming and you're like, oh, I remember this is reproductive coercion. I remember this webinar. Now I need to talk to our local DV program or our local advocate. It's great to do that legwork ahead of time. Find out if your local program, like Lee just said, many local programs might have emergency contraception for free, but some might not, or some might be out. Find out like talk to your program once a quarter at least, right? And call and say, hey, do you have this? Do you still have EC? Did you ever have EC? Why not? Right? Maybe you can, like Whiskative told me that some programs do this. You could contact them to find out more, right? You can build that relationship with your local program so that then referrals back and forth and like working with them on stuff like this and being able to talk to people that you're seeing about what your local program can offer in this realm just gets easier and easier. And then, the things that you are already doing to provide those economic supports that stabilize housing and other basic needs, the things that people are coming to you for, like just continuing to do that and listen and understanding that domestic violence is a barrier and you've got good supports and flexibility in order to support survivors, to offer those economic supports. Doing that piece actually does do a lot to help survivors be able to then connect with an advocate and free up brain space and time to be able to take care of these other things that are happening in their lives. So that I just wanted to make that connection too, that the work that you're doing that people are coming to you for, being able to do that with folks is helpful and connects to sort of that holistic picture of somebody being able to address the other barriers in their lives and to be able to address this potential, like the reproductive coercion that might be happening in their lives. All right, we're going to talk some about resources. Lee and I will probably go back and forth on this a little bit. And you should have this as a PDF copy too, with all the links and everything that you can access on your own. So you should be able to, have this whole little package as a resource for you.
So we just want to bring to your attention that we have, I know many websites, including your own offices, probably have a roundup of coronavirus resources, but we have it as well at Whiskative. And of course, we're going to have a focus on additional resources for survivors and their children and families, and we keep that updated. We just have the Get Help Now links filled out as well, just to remember that, our programs are not zip code dependent. Sometimes survivors want to step outside their community to get help, or maybe they just didn't have a good experience with the one program in town. They can certainly talk on the phone and problem solve or get support with any of our programs, including friends and family. They can do that as well. And again, in this time of coronavirus, when people are experiencing more heightened isolation and stuck at home, we just like to remind folks that even our national hotline, you can chat or text. You don't have to talk to people. If that's not something that someone can do without their partner overhearing, they can have chat call. This is also in Spanish. And then we just wanted to break it down for you a little bit more to let you know the National Domestic Violence Hotline now has advocacy support 24 hours around the clock, and they can do safer planning with folks. You can chat there, and they actually have advocates that speak over 22 languages now. They don't just have to rely on language lines, so there's a good chance that a family member you're working with or a survivor can talk to an advocate in their own language. They can do problem solving, planning, and connect people back with resources in Washington State. And then there's also a deaf hotline with video chat or texting with advocates that are using ASL that are deaf themselves. There's also the RAIN National Sexual Assault Hotline that's in English and Spanish as well, and has chat and text messaging. So again, if people are reaching out to you and you're having this conversation remotely or on the phone and you want to give resources, again, that in that proactively offering information kind of way, you can say, these are resources where you can talk with folks about what's going on in your relationship. Here's some where you can text, you can chat, you don't have to talk on the phone. People speak a lot of languages. So, you're able to provide that information, just offer it proactively without knowing that whole story again. Again, this is a poster that lives on our website. If you actually print it out, it's at 8.5 by, it works out to a really nice, no, 11 by, no, 11 by 17 poster that folds very nicely in an 8.5 by 11. But it's the forms of birth control that are less likely to be felt by a partner and has the risk of detection are the ones that interfere with your period and ones that don't. And we have these in English and Spanish. I've seen them in pre-COVID, I saw them in people's bathrooms, just so that people, while they can just get information that they want and need, treating people with dignity and the adults that they are. We don't have to know every story. The other thing that is helpful and is about to be on our website in Spanish as well is we have an online guide, friends and family guide, how to help and support someone who's living in an abusive relationship. And we really love this guide because it's very down to earth. It's very straightforward, very practical, like things you can say, things you can do without a whole lot of text to work through before you get to like, okay, give me the down and dirty. What's the best thing I can do right now? Or how can I best support folks? And by the end of the month, we'll have this in Spanish. By the end of June 30th, 2020, we'll have this up online in Spanish as well. Anything you want to add here, Tracy?
No, just that I highly recommend taking a look at it. I think that there's, like Lee said, a lot of really good practical information. And, I think that, I know it says friends and family guide. And so you're like, well, but this is, I don't have any friends and family who are dealing with this, but I think we all often encounter folks in our lives who are dealing with this, and maybe we aren't identifying it as that, or we have an uh-oh or a weird feeling about somebody in our family's relationship, but we don't know how to approach it, or even if we should. And I think that just connecting how we offer support and information in our own lives transfers over to our work as well, and how we can then see and understand the folks that we're working with. So we're all connected, right? We're all connected, and I think that it's a really great resource that will both help you in life, but also in work.
Thanks, Tracy. So here's ways that you can stay connected with us. Where you can follow Whiskative on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we also have a YouTube channel where we'll ultimately have this video also this webinar also posted. And we also just wanted to let you know, some of you are familiar with the Refuse to Abuse 5K event that we are doing July 11th, and before COVID, we're doing it at Safeco Field. At T-Mobile Park now.
T-Mobile
all together.
Park.
Thank you, T-Mobile Park. Baseball field all together. And well, we're still trying to do it, but we're doing it virtually. So we're asking people to chart a 5K wherever you are. So that's about 3 miles. And if you're like me, taking walks in the afternoon is part of my sanity these days. So take a walk, and you can send us a picture of your own finish line, walk with your family. You can still find ways to contribute and stay connected. You'll still get a swag bag from us with cool educational information, and I think a speaker this year. So if you go to Refuse to Abuse 5K 2020, you'll be able to find us online.org.
Yeah, refusetoabuse5k.org.
Thank you, refusetoabuse.k.org. And we'd love for you to join us. We still have I'm happy to see a number of people who have signed up to be a part of it, because we still, at the Coalition, we're working really hard to get money, supplies, information out to help support our programs. And proceeds from that event also support the work that allows us to do prevention kind of strategies, like create the Friends and Family Guide, or some of you have seen our How's Relationship cards with those adorable birds, but lets us do innovative work and still support work out in the community that is survivor driven and led. Anything you want to add about that, Tracy?
No, that's good.
So we want to thank you for being with us today.
Yes, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for taking this back to your work and your lives and thinking about it. Here's our contact information we normally do these in person, and we can't these days, obviously, thanks COVID. So we would truly love to hear from you with questions,
Yes, yes.
concerns, you know, ways that you're integrating this into your work. Like, we would really love to hear from you. Here's our contact information. Please contact us. For me, and I'm not sure about Lee, but neither of us are in the office these days, so I am faster over email. If you call me, it will be a delay for me to like get that voicemail and get back to you. So but feel free to email or call, and let us know what questions you have or comments you have about this topic and how it connects to the survivors that you're working with.
Yeah, we do. It's really important to hear from you because that helps us do better trainings. It helps us figure out what people want and need, including you all. And we appreciate you all giving us the time. We know that there's a little fatigue with how much we're all on screens these days. So we value your work. We value our relationship with you. And so we just thank you again.
Thanks so much.